Well, folks, welcome back. Today we are going to be looking at a 2028 Republican primary tier list. This tier list, and I'm going to make it real clear because a lot of people don't seem to remember this. This is going to be a tier list based on the general election performance in 2028. How well do I believe each of these candidates will perform in the 2028 presidential election at the general level, not in a primary, not how well do I think they would do in a Republican primary, simply how well they would do in the general election against most likely matchups from the Democrat Party. Looking at Gavin Newsom, AOC, maybe Pete Buttigieg. We'll see exactly what happens, but let's jump into it. Obviously, we'll start off with a couple of the names that, honestly, I don't want to say they shouldn't be in here, but why? Donald Trump Jr., how do I think he would perform in a general election? I don't think he performed very well at all. First of all, he's already said he doesn't want to run. He used some colorful language to describe how he feels about running for political office in 2028. Honestly, I don't think he would do good in a general election. I think he would lose, but also simply the fact that he said he doesn't want to. He has no interest in it. He doesn't even want to flatter with the idea we're just going to put him in the bottom tier. Not necessarily. Maybe if he was trying to run, maybe it'd be a little higher. But because he doesn't want to run, an F is where it deserves to be. Well, we'll go with the other child of Donald Trump, Ivanka Trump. I believe same thing. She doesn't want to run. Why is her name in this? Do I think she would perform a little bit better than Don Jr. would? I think she would. But at the end of the day, I just don't think that we're looking for a Trump dynasty in the Republican Party as of right now. Now, another name, throw out the former governor of North Dakota, Doug Burgum. Not a very charismatic guy. He ran in 2024. He's a former business owner. I just don't think he's the direction the Republican Party is looking to move right now. I simply don't think that's where the country's at. I don't think that's where the country's at. I don't think that's where the Republican Party's at. I don't think he would be the most charismatic, the most well-funded candidate. I think there's just a lot of things where he would, maybe be in the top 15, but definitely not the top 10. Like, not by any stretch of the imagination. So we'll see exactly what happens. Then, of course, Glenn Youngkin, obviously the very, very popular from the state of Virginia. Go back to 2021 when he flipped the Virginia gubernatorial election by 2 points, 1.9 percentage points. He won this state he ran a campaign on education. I think he would be a top-tier candidate. Youngkin, I think I'd have to put him in the A category. Simply, I don't think he's as good of the name recognition, but at the end of the day, he's very well-spoken. He's a good-looking guy. He is the future of the Republican Party, but I also think he's a little more establishment than where the base in the Republican Party is. I think there's a big chunk of working-class voters in America that simply, this is not the direction. They're not trying to go more establishment in the Republican Party. They're looking to go more conservative, the MAGA side, J.D. Vance, maybe someone like a Ron DeSantis. They're looking to go that direction, maybe even a Greg Abbott or a Steve Bannon. That's the direction people appear to be going inside of the Republican Party. But still, I think he would perform very well in a general election. We're going to save the vice president for less. Josh Hawley, look, I don't think he'd be that great. Do I think he's a halfway decent senator from Missouri? He's definitely a populist conservative from Missouri. Maybe in the C category, D or C. I'd have to say C. I'd have to say C for right now. I also don't think he has the ambitions to do that. I think that plays a big part of it. It's hard to see someone run or even consider it when they've already said, we don't want to run. We're not going to run. Like, that's it. They're not running. Now, we will go on to Katie Britt, who is a senator from the state of Alabama. Obviously, I think she is a up-and-coming Republican in the party. I would put her at the B category. Look, she's very well-spoken. She's a young lady. She is the future of the Republican Party. She is. She looks like the future. She is the future. She's a young, very young, will probably be in the Senate from Alabama for decades at this point if she decides not to run for higher office. I think she could perform well. I think some conservative principles that are, how would you say, molded down in Alabama maybe aren't nationwide tested ideals, but I think with a little polish and with some money behind her with name recognition, I think she could perform very well. But as of right now, I don't think she would be the best candidate. I don't think she's the worst. I think she's kind of somewhere in the middle for Republican candidates going into 2028. Now let's look at Kristi Noem. Honestly, I really want nothing to do with Kristi Noem. I'm not the biggest fan, to be honest with you. I'm not the biggest fan of all the social media stuff, the shoots with gang members, all the It's just do your job. I don't need a politician who's out there flamboyant. Obviously, that's Donald Trump, but I don't need I want someone who gets the job done. Get the fucking job done. Get it done. And I just think she's kind of weird. Just not my favorite. I don't think she is the future of the Republican Party, if I'm being honest. Look, she's a good cabinet member. She does a halfway decent job. Not my favorite. She's just not. She's somewhere in the middle. But if I had to pick in the middle, she's on the lower half of the middle. Now, Marco Rubio, I have to put him either the A or the B. I'm going to have to say A tier for right now. Look, once again, Marco Rubio, he's a young guy. He's well-spoken. He is of Hispanic descent. He looks like the future of the party. And I tell you what, talk about the biggest glow-up of anybody in the Trump administration. Marco Rubio went in where he was considered to be made a potential vice presidential pick in 2024. There's a lot of outcry from the Republican, the GOP base. That got quelled pretty quickly. After he became Secretary of State, he's wearing all these different hats. He's head of U.S. aid. You saw he went and had to testify in front of the Senate, I don't know, maybe a month or two ago, just absolutely destroying Chris Van Hollen. What is he from, like Maryland or something like that? Just absolutely annihilating him. Ripping him to pieces. Talk about one of the most staunch defenders of the Republican Party and President Trump's second administration. His name is Marco Rubio. There are big people, big names on Twitter in the conservative world who were not happy that he was considered a VP pick, that he was even considered. They're pretty happy now. I tell you, there's a lot more people that are happy with Marco Rubio. And the idea of a Rubio-Vance or a Vance-Rubio ticket in 2028 is something that a lot of people in the Republican Party look at with a lot of encouragement for the future. Now, looking at the former Vice President, Mike Pence, do I put him in the F? I don't, maybe the D, maybe, look. The last time Mike Pence won an election where he wasn't running for VP was back in 2012. He won Indiana by 3 points. It was a close election. Look, I get it. This is a state that used to be a swing state. This is a state that, look, it voted for Barack Obama by 1 point. But also remember, Mitt Romney won this by 10 points in 2012. Mike Pence ran 7 points behind the top of the ticket. 7 points behind the top of the ticket. Like, really? Really? He's establishment. He is not the direction. He is the more religious right, which I think is, I don't want to say is dissipating, but I don't think is at the forefront of the Republican. I think there's a lot of religious people in the Republican Party, but he's religious establishment Republican. He's I don't want to say a rhino, a Republican in name only, because he does still at the end of the day support a lot of Republican causes, conservative causes at the end of the day. But look, I just don't think he's anything that spectacular, and I don't think the Republican Party, this is the direction that they're looking to go. And a similar thing, Mike Pence in heels, basically, Nikki Haley. Look, she is more your country club, establishment Republican. Where did she perform well in the primaries in 2024? She performed very well in New Hampshire, in more of the upscale, the more socially liberal, fiscally conservative portions of the country. That's where she performed well. She also performed well with a lot of liberals like her. Look, you can also call her Mike Pence in heels, Dick Cheney in heels. I talk about the Republican primaries. I was scared that someone like her could become president. All of these issues that we have been faced with. Talk about India and Pakistan just about going to war. That would have been nuclear war. You have Afghanistan. You have Ukraine and Russia. That's something you have to deal with. Israel and Gaza. I do not trust her judgment when it comes to foreign policy, period. Yes, does she check the boxes for a lot of Republican causes on the domestic front? I think she does. Would she be the worst nominee? Probably not. But I think she would be. I do think she'd be pretty bad. I don't think she would win in a general election. I think a lot of liberals would come over to the Republican Party, vote in the primaries, go back to the Democrat Party for the general election. She really doesn't have a shot, in my opinion, of course. RFK Jr., I think he could make a serious case. Look, he is, I think you could say, a leader of one sect of the Republican Party, the Make America Healthy Again movement. Those former kind of libertarian-esque liberals who, there are a lot of the people who are in the Republican Party who follow the Kennedy, the MAHA movement. They used to be liberals. They used to be Democrats. Not anymore. When the Democrats became this party of big government, forced vaccinations, blind trust in institutions, RFK leads the charge against it. I think he would do well in a general election. I think he would have appeal. I think it could, there might be some issues with a running on the Republican ticket, I think you could see, especially on his views on abortion. But as long as he kind of kept to the idea that Donald Trump did, that look, I have certain views on abortion, but it's none of the federal government's damn business what goes on. If California wants abortion to be legal, we're going to do everything we can to encourage people to not get abortions, to respect life. But at the end of the day, each state has their own autonomy, and we are not going to force down one rule one way or another, whether it's abortions should be legal across the board or they should be illegal. We're not going to force it down either way. I think that is something that has become the Republican Party has become a lot more desensitized to that idea in the era of Donald Trump. And we're going to save DeSantis for the end as well. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, I just don't see her as a presidential candidate. I don't. Look, she's the governor of Arkansas right now. Her dad is currently the ambassador to Israel. I just don't think that she is, it's nothing against her, but really, I just don't think she would perform well in a general election. I don't think she would perform good as a Republican in a general election at the end of the day. Look, I think she's a good conservative Republican. I think she espouses and promotes a lot of conservative values, but in a general election, she's probably not even on my top 15, to be honest with you. There's probably names on this list or names who aren't on this list who I would choose before Sarah Huckabee. Not that I have anything against her. Look, she was a great press secretary. I think she's been a good governor of Arkansas, but she's just not the leader of the party. Not right now, at least. And Ted Cruz. I think Ted Cruz has gained a lot. I'd say a couple years ago, I probably had to put him at an F. I can put him at a C, maybe a B, but I think C is probably a good way. He's right down the middle. Look, he improved a lot. Go back to 2018. You saw how he performed in that Senate election against Beto O'Rourke in 2018. Look, he only won by 2.5 points. Fast forward to 2024, he wins by 8.5 points. Obviously, he didn't outrun. Donald Trump outran Ted Cruz by 6 points in the state. So obviously a pretty big margin, but still, he did very well. And the fact that he's had to run the last two campaigns without any money from the National Senatorial Republican Committee because of Mitch McConnell holding money back from him for that fundraising dollars, I think it's very impressive what Ted Cruz was able to do. Is he the leader of the Republican Party? No. Is he a good senator? He serves a much better purpose in the Senate than he does as running for president. As much as this may look like I'm poo-pooing on him, I just think he does he can serve our country way better being a senator than he can actually do serving as president or even running as president. And I think the same thing is said to be true with Tim Scott. I think he serves a much better purpose as a senator from South Carolina. He is now the head of the Republican National Senatorial Committee for this election cycle. I think he does a fine job where he's at right now. Presidential ambitions, I don't think should be something that is considered. Now, Tom Cotton, I would probably have to put him in the same thing. Look, it's the same thing. Ted Cruz, Tim Scott, Tom Cotton. They serve our country much better in this role than they would running for president. Now, Tulsi Gabbard. I think Tulsi Gabbard would be a halfway decent pick. Look, she's a female. She's a minority at the end of the day. We know for a lot of Democrats that, checking boxes is a big deal, but I don't think it's going to mean much running as a Republican. But I think she could very much run on that same kind of wing that Robert F. Kennedy could run on. I think she could do that. Do I think she'll be the nominee? Probably not. I really don't think that she's going to be the nominee at the end of the day. But I think she could perform well. Do I think there's some people she could beat in a general election? Sure. Remember, you're looking at a general election. Where do you have to win? Where are you going to win in a general election? Let's see. Let's get the 2028 map pulled up here. It's like, the reality is you need to be able to win in a couple places. You need to be able to win in North Carolina. You need to be able to win in Pennsylvania. Considering you perform well in Nevada and Arizona, you have to perform well in North Carolina and Pennsylvania. Do I think she's the best candidate? No. Do I think she's the worst? No. Do I think she's somewhere in the middle? Probably, above 50%? Sure. I think we can give that to her. Now we're going to look at a couple other names. Steve Bannon. I'm sorry, your name shouldn't be anywhere near this. Sorry, you will get demolished in a general election. End of story, period. Take it to the bank. It's never going to happen. Never going to happen. Now, Greg Abbott. I think Greg Abbott could make a good president. Look, he's the longtime governor of Texas, standing up for individual rights, really, embodies the Lone Star State mentality that you have. Look what he's done recently. He's bold. He's willing to take action when action is required. And I think that is decisive in being a president and to run to be a president. I think that's a big, big deal. I think in a general election, he may struggle a little bit, but just like anyone, they're going to struggle a little bit. Now, let's look at J.D. Vance. I think J.D. Vance, at the end of the day, he's in A or an S tier. Look, I think my biggest issue with J.D. Vance is that he is more of an isolationist, and I think he believes that tariffs should be used more as economic policy rather than leverage. Those are the two big issues. But at the end of the day, look, he's a young guy. He has an ethnic family. He grew up in working class America. Talk about how do you win? Look at this map. How do you win with this map? You win with working class Americans, working class voters. That is how you win. Talk about someone who grew up in Ohio, who grew up with drug addicted parents, who didn't have a father in the picture, who was raised by his grandmother, who goes on to be a Marine, who gets into prestigious colleges. It's like talk about what he was able to do with his life. Talk about it. But at the end of the day, he's just a regular guy. He's just a good old boy at the end of the day. He would fit right in with anybody else, and I think there's a part of that a lot of Americans resonate with. They like that. They like to be able to talk with a politician and look at someone and say, I could sit down and have a beer with this guy. And I think Vance fills those shoes. I really think he does. I think he's less polished than someone like a DeSantis. But maybe he's an S tier. I think the biggest issue of foreign policy and some of his economic policies I think are issues, but I think in a general election, I think he performs really well. I think he performs very well in Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and that's what matters at the end of the day. That's what matters is the working class Americans. And I'm going to put DeSantis up in the A tier as well. I was going to do S tier. Look, I think DeSantis on policy has basically, I think he has almost everything going for him. Almost everything going for him. He can make up for some of the shortfalls of DeSantis when it comes to his economic policy, when it comes to his foreign policy at the end of the day. But I think DeSantis is very well spoken, but I don't think he is as charismatic as J.D. Vance is. I think that DeSantis what he should have done is should have not ran in 24, hope to get the VP nomination from President Trump. I think he's a strong fighter. I think he's a warrior. I think he is a conservative leader of the future, but I think his charisma really kind of holds him down in this respect. Now that leaves us with two left. Vivek Ramaswamy, which, I don't think he'd perform that well in general election. Maybe you could say a B tier. Look, and he's already made it clear. He is looking to build a statewide campaign. He's not looking to go national. He is looking to build a statewide electoral coalition. A coalition that he can win in Ohio for the next. He's going to run in 26. He'll probably run again in 2030 if he wins. We're going to see what happens, but I don't think he would perform very well. And then Brian Kemp. I actually think Brian Kemp wouldn't perform too bad in a general election. Look, a lot of people rip on Brian Kemp, and I disagree with a lot of people on this. They rip on him as being a rhino or a sellout. He really isn't. This guy is probably on policy one of the most conservative individuals in America. Remember, go back to the 2018 Georgia gubernatorial election. He was the conservative candidate in that race. He was the MAGA candidate in that race. Yes, did he disagree with President Trump on what happened in 2020? Well, you know what? I disagree with President Trump on what happened in 2020. Look, I don't think the election was stolen from President Trump. It's simply what he lost. He had a bad year. 2020 was a bad year for President Trump. It's just as simple as that. He lost. He did. People are going to say that fraud occurred. Okay, maybe a tiny bit, but there was nowhere near enough fraud to overturn the election. There just simply wasn't. And it's misguided information to assume that that's what happened. I'm all about investigating it. I'm all about, doing what you have to do. But at the end of the day, he has a bad rap because of what happened in 2020. Besides that, he's one of the most conservative individuals in the Republican Party. I don't think the base will nominate him. I think it would perform halfway decent as the Republican nominee. But folks, that is going to wrap things up for today. That is my tier list for the 2028 Republican general election. This is how I believe who is going to perform the best. I believe Vance, Youngkin, Rubio, DeSantis are going to perform the best. I think the worst possible nominees in a general election are Donald Trump Jr., Mike Pence, and Steve Bannon. You also throw out Nikki Haley, Kristi Noem, Ivanka Trump, and obviously all the people in the middle, Katie Britt, RFK, DNI Tulsi Gabbard, Abbott, Ramaswamy, Kemp, and a lot of people just kind of who can serve the country where they're at better than they can running for higher office in people like Burgum, people like Josh Hawley, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, Ted Cruz, Tim Scott, and Tom Cotton. But folks, that's going to wrap things up for today. As always, if you like the content we're putting out, drop down below, hit that subscribe button, smash that like button so you never miss another video from us again in the future. And let me know your thoughts down in the comments. What do you think of this tier list? What would you change about this tier list? What do you not agree with? Let me know down below. I'd love to start a conversation with you on exactly what you would change about this tier list. But as always, folks, that's going to wrap things up. We'll catch you next time.